Koalas. Kangaroos. Curious creatures who carry their young in pouches. Scientists once thought such animals were dropouts in the evolutionary race and could only survive in the isolation of Australia. But recent discoveries tell a different story. Bloodthirsty, saber-toothed marsupials made a stand on every continent of the world. Millions of years ago came the attack of the killer kangaroos. Australia has been called the world's great evolutionary laboratory. Isolated from the rest of the continents for millions of years, its native animals have been, biologically speaking, free to travel the road less taken. These extraordinary creatures are the living symbols of Australia. Teddy bear-like koalas, bounding, big-eared kangaroos, slow, docile wombats, and cartoon-inspiring Tasmanian devils. Australia's marsupials have always struck outsiders as quaint, cuddly, and sometimes comical. But the fossil record in Australia is introducing paleontologists to an array of marsupials more diverse and unique than anyone would have imagined. Australia is a tough land for the paleontologists. It lacks the kind of geological forces that wrench up mountains and tear gashes into ancient fossil-laden sediments. For most of this century, the fossil record before 50 million years ago was a virtual blank. Discovered in 1983, the fossil site known as Riverslea in western Queensland would change all that. This unglamorous sheep station would soon produce enough fossils to quadruple Australia's entire paleontological record. For a decade, paleontologist Michael Archer and his colleagues have been reaping a rich scientific harvest from Riverslea. After digging up the limestone sediments, they haul them back to the lab at the University of New South Wales. A good soaking in acid often rewards the paleontologist with a chaotic jumble of ancient jaws, teeth, and other bones of long-gone marsupials. Archer has discovered that many living marsupials have rather fearsome skeletons in the closet.
Here's an assortment of the sorts of things that we're finding in Riverslea about 20 million years ago. It includes all sorts of strange herbivores, carnivores. One of the ones that just blew our mind right in the beginning was a thing that ought to be a representative of one of the gentlest, cutest sort of groups, a kangaroo. This thing, this offense to the senses, was a flesh-eating kangaroo.
Armed with rapier teeth and voracious appetites, the bloodthirsty kangaroos that stalked the plains of Australia millions of years ago are just part of the remarkable evolutionary tale of the marsupials. Today, there are three classes of mammals in the world: placental mammals, marsupials, and monotremes. They differ primarily in how they reproduce. Monotremes lay eggs. Only two types of these strange mammals survive: the spiny anteater and the duck-billed platypus. They are found in the wild only in Australia and New Guinea. Placental mammals like us, and like this pregnant hyena, carry a developing fetus in the womb into a fully developed infant. Remarkable though this birthing process is, biologists have always assumed that the placental way of reproducing is the superior one. The argument has been that because placental babies spend a long time in the womb, they are born better developed. Regardless of the zoological debate, the distribution of mammals in the world today is quite lopsided. Placental mammals dominate everywhere but Australia and New Zealand, all of the continents and the seas as well. Australia and New Zealand, on the other hand, belong to the marsupials. Aside from a handful of newcomers, Australia has a remarkable lack of placental mammals. But it wasn't always so. Marsupial fossils have been found on just about every continent in the world. Why did the marsupials thrive in Australia and die out just about everywhere else? Scientists have long held that on the continents where marsupials competed head-to-head with placentals, the placentals won out. On the island continent, where there were no placentals, the marsupials were granted a reprieve.
In fact, the usual idea, it goes back to Matthew, a chap in the United States, is that marsupials came here because they were forced out of the northern lands as inferior mammals and forced into the corners of the world that the placentals didn't want.
The notion that marsupials are somehow inferior is deeply rooted in traditional biology. Zoology texts commonly refer to them as primitive. Even their technical names reveal a bit of placental condescension, according to zoologist Bruce Brewer.
The marsupials are members of the Metatheria, which means animals that are almost good beasts. And then we, the placental mammals, since we made up this terminology, are the Eutheria, or the good beast.
Biologists have had this preconception that because we are placental mammals, that is, we don't have our young in a pouch or anything, that must be the superior type of mammal, and that anything else is somehow an inferior approximation to this placental condition.
If so, how did marsupials manage to reach the safe haven of Australia and survive? According to traditional dogma, they were saved by continental drift during the Eocene, 50 million years ago. They were lucky refugees from an ancient time when all the continents were connected.
They assumed that that was because when Australia broke away from Gondwana about 45 million years ago, only marsupials had managed to get here.
But new fossil discoveries from Riversley are rewriting the natural history of the mammals. A startling find hints that the marsupials may not have fled from their placental cousins, but instead conquered Australia. No one knows exactly where or when the evolutionary rivalry between the marsupial mammals and the placental mammals began, but it stretches back at least 100 million years. The earliest marsupial fossils discovered point to the northern hemisphere, not Australia as the cradle of marsupial evolution. This stretch of badlands in central Utah is Robber's Roost, where the infamous Butch Cassidy often hid from the law. Paleontologists have long hunted other renegades here, the great dinosaurs. But University of Oklahoma paleontologist Richard Cifelli has come here in search of much smaller game, some no bigger than the head of a pin.
You'd think it rained crocodiles here or something.
It's a needle in a haystack business and back-breaking work. Cifelli and his team haul gunny sacks full of sediment back to camp, where their work looks more like prospecting for gold than digging up fossils. They must first soak the hard rock deposits in water, sifting out the tiny fossils and drying them in the hot desert sun. The casual observer might think they were sleuthing for the glint of precious metals or gems. But their painstaking work does produce gems of a sort. It was here, in 1992, that Cifelli found the world's oldest known marsupial.
Here in my left hand is the lower jaw of this thing we're calling Coccopelia. It's a marsupial or proto-marsupial, maybe a mouse-sized animal. Probably would have looked like a Virginia opossum shrunk way down to mouse size. This animal is about 100 million years old, so it was living during the age of dinosaurs and living in the footsteps of giants, literally. There were a lot of pretty fierce predators around at that time, so not a good place to be if you're a furry little creature.
For another 35 million years, the world would remain a dangerous place for the little mammals living underfoot of the dinosaur. But then the dinosaurs died out. Mammals had free reign of the planet, and they took it. The starting gun sounded for the race between the pouched mammals and the unpouched mammals. Their fates would be dictated by their distinctive strategies for reproducing, and the deck seemed stacked against the marsupials.
Marsupials are primitive in that they are forced to give birth very soon after conception, within a matter of a week, couple weeks, say. This is because the young is not genetically identical with the mom, and so as it develops, the mom's immune system recognizes it as an alien and has to get rid of it. So birth takes place very, very quickly. Placentals have invented this fancy system of embryonic membranes that pretty much insulates junior from mom and allows prolonged intrauterine development. And that's critical to the success of placental mammals.
Most importantly, the brain can grow larger in a womb than in a pouch, giving placentals an edge in intelligence and allowing them to create more sophisticated social systems. Placentals were able to specialize physiologically as well, which allowed them to diversify and fill varied ecological niches.
Marsupials never were able to specialize into things that placentals did in terms of having really strongly modified forelimbs, flippers, for instance, or flying-type wings like bats have. If you're going to modify those forelimbs, you have to start very early in development. Marsupials can't do that because they're forced to have these forelimbs developed in a certain way so they can climb and get.
Marsupials clearly had the upper hand in the southern parts of the world.
Marsupials really took off on the continents of Australia and South America, and we find all these tremendous examples of convergent evolution. That is, marsupials doing the same things that placentals were doing on other continents. For example, in South America, there was a marsupial saber-tooth, looked for all the world like a placental saber-tooth, and this is a large lion-sized animal with canine teeth, the fangs that could have been 6 or 7 inches long. Clearly a major predator there. There were gigantic grizzly bear-sized boar hyenoids that probably were partly carnivorous to omnivorous, basically eat whatever they wanted to.
The marsupial killers stayed top dog in South America for some 60 million years. But by 2 million years ago, the big predatory marsupials of South America had all but disappeared, outcompeted by the likes of the new placental saber-toothed cats and great bears. These newcomers traveled to South America across the newly formed land bridge now connecting the continents. For many decades, biologists saw a clear implication in this succession. The superior placentals had driven the inferior marsupials to extinction. It was justifiable fratricide in the best Darwinian tradition. But now, a new, more ominous creature was about to appear on the scene and overturn decades of scientific belief. At Riversley, the fossils are revealing a marsupial past that belies their gentle image. Michael Archer has pieced together a portrait of a vicious predator reborn from Australia's past. Standing about 5 feet tall and burlier than today's kangaroos, these sharp-toothed killers probably snacked on their more docile relatives. The modern kangaroo is not the only living marsupial with a skeleton in the closet. The sluggish vegetarian wombat has its own bloodthirsty ancient cousin.
Among the other sorts of spectacular types of flesh-eating animals that developed in Australia, marsupials, were these marsupial lions, aptly named pouched animals that were, at their larger size, the size of a fully grown adult lion. Incredible things. And studies of the teeth of these animals have demonstrated that they are more specialized as carnivores than any other mammal has ever been anywhere at any time in the world. They had, much like the carnivorous kangaroos did, they probably used their very powerful lower incisors as stabbing devices. Again, these are monstrous stilettos for tearing, perhaps ripping open the prey. They had a whole range, a smorgasbord of things to eat at this time. This was in the end of the Pleistocene. There were giant kangaroos, 3 meters, or about 9 feet tall. There were giant wombats the size of a small horse. There was a whole range of things, hippopotamus-sized marsupials, all of them yummy.
These marsupial lions roamed the Australian plains until just 30,000 years ago. By then, the Aboriginal people had already arrived, and almost certainly had some unfortunate encounters with the big pouched lions.
And I'm certain that would have been one of the most unpleasant sights any human being ever saw as they went into the great hunting ground, was to see one of these things coming up on them. To see an animal with bolt-cutting teeth the size of these things that could cut a leg off a kangaroo without even sort of batting an eye. The teeth, when they come together, are just like the kind of giant bolt cutters that you might find in any hardware store today. So it would have made camping in those days an extremely interesting experience.
But the discovery that has rocked the scientific community is this tiny fossil tooth of a placental mammal, which Archer found in 55-million-year-old Australian sediment.
In that clay, we found, sure, what we expected, marsupials galore, all sorts of interesting things, but lo and behold, a placental mammal.
Most scientists assume marsupials arrived in Australia before placental mammals. When the island continent split off, the marsupials were left alone to evolve without competition. In effect, they won Australia by default. But the tooth would change Archer's mind.
The only parsimonious conclusion had to be it was a placental mammal that was here with the marsupials in Australia at the same time. They started in the racing blocks at the same time. When the gun went off, those placentals fell on their face. The marsupials basically picked them up with a great smile on their face and kicked them off the edge of the continent.
Archer sent casts of the tooth to experts around the world, comparing the number and position of the cusps. Most of them came to the same stunned conclusion. It looked more like a placental molar than a marsupial one. When Archer and good help published the results, scientists were quick to understand the enormous implications. Marsupials didn't win by default. They had the advantage.
The important thing about that tooth, if it is a placental, is that it shows placentals were present in Australia early on, and that they didn't outcompete marsupials. In fact, quite the contrary, that marsupials took over in the presence of placentals. So that contradicts sort of a long-standing scenario.
Clearly, Archer's discovery of a placental tooth at Riverslea is compelling. But many scientists are not yet willing to rewrite the natural history of Australia on the strength of something so small and so singular. Australian paleontologist Tim Flannery is not so easily convinced.
The idea that there's been primitive placental animals in Australia really is based on one tooth. It's only about 2 millimetres long, but even worse, it's based on the position of one cusp on one tooth, which is only a relative thing, very, very small differences.
There's a lot of difficulty in identifying a single isolated tooth. Like I said, I think a defensible argument has been made that it is placental. It does compare very closely also to some marsupial groups, and so I think the jury's still out on that one.
Whether marsupials outcompeted placentals or won by default is still open to debate. But one thing is certain. Marsupials were designed for Australia's unique environment.
Well, Australia's always been the most different of all of the continents. It's been isolated for a very long time from all of the others. And it's also had very strange conditions here. For instance, Australian soils are terribly infertile, what we've got of them. A lot of the country is just rock. And we've also got this really strange climatic pattern, which is called the Southern Oscillation. And that means that rainfall in Australia isn't regular. As some of our early poets said, it's a land of drought and flooding rain. There's not much in between. There's not really an average year. And those conditions make life really hard for animals like mammals. So it's always been an odd continent, and maybe that explains in part why the marsupials have done so well here. Marsupials don't use as much energy as placentals, just because when they're sitting around doing nothing, their metabolic rate's a lot lower than placental mammals. So that gives them a bit of an advantage.
The rough climate of Australia becomes advantageous to marsupials because of their unique reproductive system.
For marsupials, the young is in the pouch. There's very little investment. If times are bad, if there's a drought, something like that, you can eject the young and cut your losses essentially and live to reproduce again.
Perhaps Riversley will yield up more secrets of the marsupial saga in Australia, but for now the scientific community is looking at marsupials with new respect. In many ways, it would seem that such a vindication for marsupials is a hollow victory. The age of the great carnivorous marsupials is over. The marsupial lions were gone by 30,000 years ago. The marsupial wolf, also called the Tasmanian tiger, was in serious decline by the modern age. European settlers saw it as a pest and hastened its demise with a single-minded determination. In 1936, the last known Tasmanian wolf died in captivity. Today, the small but fierce Tasmanian devil is on the endangered list. But an unlikely champion of the marsupial cause has made a stand in the northern hemisphere. The unassuming opossum has increased its range from South America all the way up to Canada. And even the common kangaroo is making unexpected inroads into the north. Released into some of the dwindling wilds of England and Germany, kangaroos seem to be thriving. It is Australia, land down under, with its rugged, inhospitable terrain, that will always be the domain of the marsupials and the ancient home of the killer kangaroos.